Good morning and welcome to Gascoigne Howman's latest Instagram Live, and I'm here today in The Space in Congleton, and I am joined by a name that may be familiar, and indeed a face that may be familiar, the Holman of Gascoigne Howman, John Holman. Good morning.
Good morning, Robert.
Welcome.
Good morning and happy Christmas. It's not too early to say that.
I think it's not too early to say that. Thank you very much, and it is appreciated. And we thought with our sort of Christmas end of year feel, we thought we'd do a bit of a review of what's gone on in 2024 from the Gascoigne Howman property perspective, and look a little bit ahead to what may follow next year in 2025. So, John, first of all, thank you for joining us and welcome. And let's do a bit of sort of myth busting. Now it's December, everyone's focusing on Christmas presents, and the high streets are looking beautiful and all that kind of stuff. Is anyone actually buying and renting houses in December? What's the reality?
I think the mood of the market is determined rather more by what's going on in the overall economy and what's going on in the housing market generally. Depends, I might say, if you mean agreeing to buy or opposed to contracts. Of course, activity level does tend to drop off a bit, but the whole process takes longer than people think, and therefore actual sales have held up this December extremely well. If I go back to last December, they weren't terribly good, but our sales, I just looked at the figures this morning for 3 weeks of December, and they're absolutely in line with what they were in February or March or April of this year, and they've actually gradually increased as the year has progressed.
It's really interesting, that, isn't it? I mean, I think that this time of year, my experience on the ground is that we probably deal with a lesser volume of people, but those that are looking in December, on the whole, tend to be pretty serious. You know, they tend to be focused and, you know, wanting to do something, you know, and, you know.
The statistics would point that way.
Yeah.
Possibly stamp duty changes might have a bit of something to do with that.
Yeah.
But, you know, you might come on to that a bit more later. But certainly the market at the moment is pretty active, really, in terms of agreement of sales.
Yeah.
And more so, it always surprises me in terms of completions.
Right.
Because the process, once you've agreed to buy a property, you've actually got to get the solicitor to do the searches, get your mortgage in place, everything like that.
Survey.
It always takes quite a long length of time. And there seems to be a big push for people to be in by Christmas.
There's definitely that, isn't there? That every year there is this thing about I want to be in for Christmas, which is, I find, quite curious in some regards, because you could say it's the worst time to do it because you're very busy and you've got the kids stuff, and but actually there is a thing, isn't there, about it? So do you find, and have you seen historically, that in terms of exchanges and completions before Christmas, is there normally a bit of a spike in the run-up?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember going around to somebody's house, and they just bought their property from us on Christmas Eve, and there they were, surrounded by packing cases.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't think that would be the last day you'd want to actually move house, but nevertheless, there is actually an increase in the number of contracts, and we've seen that already this year so far.
And in many ways, it's actually quite a busy time for lots of our colleagues in the offices, isn't it? Liaising with solicitors and liaising with buyers and sellers with this sort of, you know, deadline. In mind.
False deadline in some respects, but nevertheless a deadline in people's minds. So the rental market's actually slightly different.
Talk to me about the rental market. What's going on there?
Well, the rental market's been good and strong all year, and there were some national statistics released yesterday suggesting that rents in the northwest have gone up by 10% this year. Our own experience is that they've gone up by rather less than that. We saw a big rise in 2023, but if you take Northwest regionally, perhaps Cheshire isn't always, Cheshire and the High Peak isn't always typical of that, and ours has risen a bit more slowly than that this year, but there's still been the situation that most properties offered for rent are snapped up pretty quickly. And the entry cost into a rental property over the last 2 years has risen quite a bit. You know, even in our less valued areas, you can't really find a small 2-bedroom property for less than £750, £800 a month.
And that's a massive change, isn't it? Because I remember even probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, there would be quite a few entry levels at, I don't know, 500 or 550 pounds, but that's pretty much unheard of now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think unless your budget is sort of 750, 800 pounds, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
And in the more popular areas, entry levels can be over £1,000.
Yeah, and that would be for a 3-bedroom semi, perhaps.
Even a 2-bedroom terrace on a nice road.
So that has changed quite a lot. Talk to me about something now, John. Boxing Day. Now, Boxing Day, I must speak for myself here. I'm not particularly thinking of selling lots of houses on Boxing Day. I'm probably just chilling out a bit after Christmas Day, eating some nice food. But as the years have gone by, perhaps driven by technology and website portals, there's been a bit more focus on Boxing Day. So what is all this about? And is it true? And give us a bit of a view on that.
I don't think it's just Boxing Day, Robert. It's just post-Christmas period. It starts on Boxing Day, of course, but people are at home. They've got a bit more leisure time.
Yeah. More time to chat.
Whether it's to actually value their own property or whether it's actually with a view to contemplating a move during 2025. Certainly, the statistics on all the major portals show huge peaks. It hasn't changed that much through the years, because I can remember as a younger man, pre internet, we actually had to staff the branches up with extra people for the days that we were open post Christmas, as people came to actually visit us for the first time. And I used to regard it as a really important time, because that was the first chance I had of speaking to people who might be considering moving
in the year to come,
in the following year.
Interesting.
And and we had to make sure we were fully staffed up, because we knew we'd be very busy. As you rightly point out, it's a bit different now. The branches don't tend to be that busy with footfall. The phone might go a good few times.
Yeah.
But what does happen is you get those people who say, I'm thinking of moving. So Rightmove, Zoopla, any other portals are hugely busy during that post-Christmas period, when people have got that little bit more time to be able to be researching.
Yeah, I suppose Christmas does, to a degree, almost bring focus to it, doesn't it? Because you might be in a house and you might think, I love this house, but it's a bit small for me, it's a bit big for me, or this time next year I'd like to be closer to my grown-up child, or my elderly mother. So it's probably maybe brings a focus almost to what's next in my life. But it's quite interesting to hear you say that, although maybe the technology has changed in terms of the web portals, the actual principle of people thinking about next year has been alive for...
It is consistent.
Interesting. Okay, so it's maybe nothing new, but it's just expressed differently.
And I think it's helped by whatever's going on in the market. So this time last year, you got very high interest rates. There's been one reduction this year down to 4.75% in base rate. We're going to know later this morning what's going to happen this time. Certainly it's widely predicted it's going to be unchanged into next month. But certainly the anticipation is, once we digest the extra costs from the rise in living wage and the rise in employers' national insurance, as long as that doesn't creep too much through to the inflation figures, the drift on interest rates is downwards. And that, I think, gives people courage to actually consider the fact that now might be a nice time to move.
I think you're exactly right with that. I remember my mortgage personally came up for renewal this year, and I remember doing a sort of a spreadsheet where I thought, well, the best case possible would probably be 3.5%, and the worst case possible could be 6.5% at the peak. I think I ended up at 4.4%, so sort of the better end. But the difference between, for example, 4.4% and 5.4% is really massive every month, isn't it? So each quarter, each 0.5% does make a difference. And actually, it's a useful prompt, because we do have a mortgage services division at Gascoigne Halman, don't we?
So we do, and it's very active. And I spoke to Scott yesterday, and I said,
Scott's the guy who runs this department.
Scott's the director in charge of it all, and I asked him what was the trend in interest rates, and he said fixed rate deals have risen slightly over the last month, because they were heading down at a rate of knots, but then it suddenly became apparent that the interest rate reductions would be a bit slower than was anticipated. So fixed rate deals are perhaps very slightly more expensive than they might have been in September, but they're still considerably cheaper than they were this time last year.
Yeah, that is key to it, isn't it? Now, John, I want you to imagine you're someone in Cheshire or the High Peak, and you're or South Manchester, and you've got a nice house to sell, and you're thinking, right, I'm going to put it on the market next April, next May, because that's when all the activity will happen. Is that a good idea, or should said person think about doing it sooner? Discuss.
Well, I think it's when it's right for the individual, but having said that, the market doesn't operate in sectors or segments, as I've already referred to. The market operates in terms of what's going on in the economy, what's going on in terms of the general sentiment, what the newspapers are saying. And what the newspapers are saying at the moment is the market in the second half of 2024 has been very, very strong and will move forward into 2025 very, very strong. So our pipeline of sales that's sold subject to contract is over 50% higher this year than it was last year.
50%, and that's a big increase, isn't it?
That's a big increase over last year. I would say last year might have been pretty poor, but equally allowing for that, it's still a significant increase.
Yeah.
I've already said December sales are looking to be at least as high as they were in March or April of this year, and those we expect to carry on into January, February, March. So we've also got the added impetus of the fact that if you can get your house on the market and get it sold and get it done before the stamp duty change in March, then there's the opportunity for quite a significant saving.
Now let's unpack that, because stamp duty, in my experience, is one of those areas which does it's a tax which nobody likes. I think it's fair to say that. When going back
except
to
Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, except Rachel Reeves, correct. I mean, back in the post-COVID era, when Rishi Sunak was trying to boost the housing market, and he was Chancellor at the time, he did this sort of stamp duty holiday, didn't he? And that had an unbelievable effect. It really, I remember very well, actually. I had a gentleman who bought a house for me, and he saved £15,000 on his stamp duty, and we got talking about it, and he was really pleased with this, really happy. I did point out to him that he'd actually spent £25,000 over the agreed price, but he was still happy. He was still happy because he was, saving.
He perceived he'd got a good deal.
Correct. That's it. So it does have an effect. So just give us a bit of a window into what is the change in stamp duty. What will make it more expensive in April than it will do in March?
Well, at the present moment in time, stamp duty isn't payable until £300,000. That'll reduce to £150,000, and as a consequence of that, there's a huge saving there. It's even more significant for the first-time buyer,
right,
who currently has no stamp duty payable up to £450,000, that will reduce to £300,000. So if the first-time buyer is buying a house for £450,000, they'll have £6,250 in stamp duty to pay, which they wouldn't have had this year or until March.
So that is, particularly for first-time buyers, that is very significant, isn't it?
It is indeed.
So I suppose there may be an argument, therefore, that you might see if we take the view that conveyancing, which, just to do some jargon busting, is the bit when we do the legal work and the surveys and the searches and all of that sort of stuff. Actually, if someone goes to the market in, say, January, there is at least a chance, if they were to agree that sale quite quickly in January, they might be able to get it through
before then. And it happens in all sectors of the market. There is a stamp duty saving in all sectors of the market. So there will be a bit of a push on. There'll be a bit of a push on for the lawyers to get housing transactions through. But anybody that wants to catch the benefit of that needs to be getting a bit of a wiggle on, really, in terms of getting their house on the market.
Yeah, interesting. So
and it's a fallacy to think the fact that the market suddenly gets busier when the leaves start coming back onto the trees and things like that. It just doesn't work like that at all.
And I suppose that's because, it's a circumstance-driven business, isn't it? If you're moving because of your job, or you're moving because you need more space because you've got an expanding family, or you're moving because you may be struggling with the increased interest rates and need to downsize, any of those reasons, they're not really related to January, March, May, December, are they? They're related to your life at that at that moment.
Yeah, to a certain degree, but you have confidence to go ahead and make a move when you perceive the fact that the market's doing okay, prices are slowly inching up.
Yeah.
It gives you great confidence to do it. If you suddenly had, heaven forbid, base rate increases and mortgage cost increases coming in April, May, June time, then that would actually have the reverse effect, and that would really pull all the confidence from the property market, and all what we expect is going to happen next year would suddenly disappear.
I suppose an example of that, looking back not that long ago, was perhaps when you had the Liz Truss sort of mini budget, which had this very dramatic effect on the economy, and interest rates suddenly shot up. I mean, that was probably a good example of one of those where really all best laid plans out of the window.
Disappeared, yeah. It shattered confidence.
Yeah.
And all that happened is everybody sat on their hands.
So it was
Nothing.
less houses sold.
Yeah, sure.
Simple as. You've already slightly touched on it, but looking ahead to 2025, you seem pretty confident that the residential sale market will continue its positive trajectory. Rental market, similar pattern, are you expecting?
I think there'll be tenants for all the properties that are going up for rent. I don't foresee huge increases in rents. The reason being that I think we're at the limit of affordability for an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
And for that reason, and that's why I think we've seen a slower increase this year than we had last year, in the fact that, if you put something on and you try and be a bit aggressive with your pricing, then you find it's not going to be taken. So I suspect the rental market will be good.
Yeah.
I suspect rents will remain at current levels, possibly inch a little bit upwards. Our prediction is for them to inch upwards, but inch rather than jump.
The jump. Got it. Okay. Let's talk about this year for Gascoigne Halman. So there's been a couple of acquisitions. So you've made some acquisitions on the rental side. I think you have had expanded that slightly, haven't you, as well? So give us a slight feel for that.
Yeah, we acquired a lettings business in the Marple area. In the middle part of the year. That's been very successful for it. It was run very successfully by a couple who was looking to retirement, and we acquired that. And we were quite excited in September that we acquired Baker Wynn & Wilson in Nantwich, an excellent company.
Yeah.
It's not about size, it's about quality. So if we perceive a company that's actually with the same outlook on the business that we have, tries to do the job properly, and is looking to change the way in which they operate, then we're very happy to try and arrange or agree for them to become part of Gascoigne Halman. And with Baker Wynn Wilson, it'll be a little bit different because we're going to continue to trade it as Baker Wynn Wilson.
Yeah. John Baker is still actively
because
involved.
John Baker, fine chap that he is, he's still very much actively involved in the business. So we'll leave that exactly as it is.
And it's been quite interesting for Gascoigne Halman as a company sort of from 2020 onwards, because pre that point, obviously the heartland of the business, Wilmslow, Prestbury, Alderley Edge, Knutsford, South Manchester, you previously expanded into the Peaks, but South Cheshire you haven't done particularly much in, but now you've got quite a strong presence there, haven't you?
I wonder why that is. I'm probably looking at the reason why that is as much as anything else. Robert, you and I first started, you'll remember this closer than me for accurate dates, 2019.
Spot on, you are right, yeah.
2019 we started having a cup of coffee.
We did.
And talking about it. You left your previous company and were wondering which way to turn, and I'm pleased to say it's been a great success, and you've been a great success in the Tarpley area, and as a consequence we've grown from there into Frodsham.
Yeah, and Andrew Hayes, a fantastic business there.
Yes, that's a good business, and now John Baker and Baker Wynn & Wilson. But these things take a long time, don't they? Yeah. I was thinking whilst I was driving here, I probably had my first cup of coffee with John Baker talking about estate agents generally, not necessarily about buying his business, but pre-COVID time, probably not long after I'd actually started chatting to you. And at that stage he was very happy with his lot, and then life changes, we all get older and everything else, and it arrived at a situation where the conversation changed slightly into ways in which we might be able to work together.
And then from that, it grows, doesn't it? Yeah.
You know, the only thing that we have as a company is the fact of people, and people make the company, and people are very important to me and very important to our business. And if we're successful in attracting the right quality of people, then we'll be the right quality of business.
And let's just kind of probe into that a little bit. So, for example, you know, if you saw an area, a geographical location, you thought, well, that would be a good place for Gascoigne Halman to be. I guess what you're saying to me there is you wouldn't open in that area unless you had a person or a team of people that you felt knew that area, were confident about that area, and could make a big difference in that area. It would almost be people first, rather than the other way around.
I have done that in the past. Put a pin in a map and said we ought to be there.
Yeah.
And then tried to search around for the right person, and that's always been a struggle.
Right.
We've always been more successful when we've had the right people to start off with.
Yeah.
Know that patch, know that area, can work that area, and the thing tends to be successful
It naturally-
from an early stage.
Naturally flows from from that point. Interesting, good. And talk to me about if someone out there is sort of running a business, successful estate agency business at the moment, but is maybe as you say, getting older or thinking of retiring or changing. I assume that you would always be happy to at least have an exploratory conversation, not to say it would necessarily turn into something, but I assume
it always starts with cups of coffee, and probably more often than not goes nowhere.
Right, interesting.
And then there's lots of people I've met and had conversations with, and we've talked about things, and then it ends up just being put on the back burner. But on occasions, then a few years later, it can resurrect, and there can be further discussions, and something can happen. But certainly, we'd always look to acquire like-minded businesses if we possibly can. But there's no great search to get bigger just for the sake of it. It's all about trying to retain the quality and the image and the professionalism.
I assume that if you say I want to have X number of branches, the danger would be you become obsessed with that number, but you actually lose sight of.
Yeah, it's definitely not what I've owned. If you go back to 1990 when we started in Wilmslow and Prestbury, and you'd have said to me 30 odd years ago, you're going to actually end up with 23 branches across the county and into the High Peak, I'd have said you must be joking.
You never believed it.
Not a chance, because I was never really the raison d'etre for the business.
Interesting. So it has evolved that way, but it wasn't the master plan.
Yeah.
Got it.
And it's quite nice. It's quite nice meeting new people. It's quite nice exploring new businesses.
Yeah.
Every business is different, and
Yeah.
you learn a bit of something from each one of these deals.
Of course you do. Let's just talk about, put you on the spot, in terms of the Gascoigne Halman territory, where we've got lots of offices in lots of locations, is there a certain area which you sort of think, ooh, we're seeing in terms of whether it be rental values or sale values or transactions, where we're seeing a bit of unexpected growth, or we're seeing development in nearby areas around? Is there any particular?
Well, there's quite a few places that have grown significantly. We're sitting in one at the moment here in Congleton.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I was looking at the stats. I've got them here in front of me for the housing developments in Cheshire East and Cheshire West. So you'll recall, of course, that Angela Rayner has said that there's going to be 101.5 million more homes in the next 5 years, and as a consequence, the expectations has been raised for both Cheshire East and Cheshire West. So Cheshire East, which historically was at 977, is going to be 2,461. A 152% increase, sorry, that's Cheshire East, did I say that? And Cheshire West, which historically was 532, will be 1,914, a 260% increase. So our Cheshire is actually going to have a lot of new building over the next 5 years. I just hope our infrastructure of roads and schools can cope with it all.
Yeah, I think that is one of the, I know Angela Rayner would say that she's trying to address that, that is probably one of the common points of contention or complaints, isn't it? That the new house is fine, but you do need doctor surgeries, schools, roads to go with that, don't you, really? And I think,
and to come back to your point, those new houses in those locations might make us just look more closely at those places, but we'll see. I mean, who knows?
Indeed. And in fact, one report I read in the week was saying that actually we may, as a country, possibly even lack the amount of builders that we need to build all these new houses.
I think that's a very optimistic target for that very reason. Have you tried to get a plumber or an electrician at your home recently? So what's the chance of having an endless supply of these?
Yeah, they're not in bountiful supply, are they? No, but that's one to watch, isn't it? So we could maybe discuss that in 12 months' time at our next Christmas review. And just sort of rounding off next year, going into 2025. What's the goal for Gascoigne Hellman? What's on the agenda? I guess to a degree, maybe more of the same. But just give us a bit of a flavour.
Yeah, I mean, we did our initial forecast for 2025 back in August, and we had to revise that quite significantly in December because of the very active final 2 quarters. I would hope we'll have a good year. I'd like to see some continuity in terms of the fact that nothing comes along to upset us, nothing comes along.
No general elections, no
world wars or anything like that.
All of that stuff.
We live in slightly
unsettling,
concerning times. In which case, I think the market's set to go very well. I hope that the tax rises introduced by Rachel Reeves don't dampen the enthusiasm in the economy too much. That to me is our biggest concern. So that needs to be digested, in which case we're all set to be quite good. For GH, we've got quite a lot to do within the company in terms of the fact of growth areas out of the existing business. But if the right acquisition comes along, then we'll have a look at it.
Excellent. Well, I think that's been a very comprehensive review of the year, so thank you very much for coming in this morning. We'll put a note in the calendar for 12 months' time, but we'll all be a little bit older, maybe wiser. We'll wait and see. And thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions about the 2025 market or topics you'd like us to address on a future Instagram Live, do feel free to feed them into us, and we will do our absolute best to answer them in the new year. In the meantime, may I wish you a very Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in 2025.